with
Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ted Santos. I am your host. I am the host for The Creative Alchemist, and I am your co-host. I never take this trip alone. I always have a co-host with me. We are the show that was made for business. We talk to you about your business, your strategy, marketing, leadership, money, and even your health. And today, as always, we will have a very special guest. Before we introduce the guest, I'd like to introduce to you my co-host. Let them know you're here.
Hi, this is Lori Miller from LGC Interior Design. Sorry for starting a few minutes late. We're having some technical difficulties, but I am here, and welcome. And I believe we have Tanya on the line. Is Tanya on? Hello?
Hi, Tanya.
Is she in?
Oh, so we have some more technical difficulties here.
Yeah. Maybe? Tanya, you in now? Ted? Can you hear me? I can hear you. Is Ted still there? We are having major technical difficulties.
Okay,
Ted?
now I'm here.
There you go.
I'm here now.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Tanya, hi.
Hello. How are you, Lori and Ted? How's everything today?
I'm great. Thank you. We must have another caller on the line. I see 4 numbers. So
okay.
Interesting.
A 205, a 703, and a 610.
Okay, so we're going to let them hold for a couple of minutes so we can introduce Tanya. And
Sounds
Tanya
great.
will get to tell them about herself, who she is. You and I will ask her a few questions so everyone can get a sense as to who she is. And then we'll open up the lines and let the questions begin. So, Tanya, welcome to our show. Thank you for accepting the invitation to be a guest.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a great honor, and I appreciate you taking my leadership skills and my expertise into consideration and bringing them into your program so we can share and help grow others. So I'm excited to pour knowledge into your listeners this evening. A little bit about myself. Can you hear me?
Sure. Just so everyone knows we always have a theme. So our theme is how do leaders make others successful? So we usually ask a question, and that's what it is. And I think a sub-question that will go along with it that's relevant, and we'll touch on it, and maybe even dive into it, is can you lead through this global pandemic? So I think we're going to take on 2 things. So we're going to put a lot of pressure on you, Tanya. You're going to address how do leaders make others successful, and then can you lead through this global pandemic? So always like to give people a sense of who the guest is. Where are you from originally?
I'm from New Jersey originally. I was raised in Newark, and maybe right after second quarter of life, so 25, 26, I moved a little south of Newark and lived in New Egypt, Jacobstown area, which is right outside of Andrews Air Force Base. And then I joined the Army and came on active duty. So I'm now retired and residing in Maryland. I split my time between Maryland and Georgia.
All right, excellent. And it's interesting. So I'm a Jersey boy. The Lori's from New York. They always tease us and tell us we need a passport to get into New York to get across the bridge or the tunnel. So I've been told you and I are from a foreign country called New Jersey. That's the way they treat us.
Isn't that true?
So, just kind of I don't know, maybe it's not a funny story. It wasn't at the time. The first time I drove in New York, I was 19, and I was lost. It was hot. It was about 90 degrees. I had no AC. I had I think it was a 74 Ford Pinto, and I was driving in circles, and people were beeping their horns saying, "Hey, you drive like a Jersey. Get out of here. Go back to Jersey." I never knew there was a rival. So
that's a new one to me. So you just enlightened me. I wasn't aware of that either.
Exactly. So so you've had well, I shouldn't say had. You still have a very interesting, intriguing, and powerful career. You started out in a position that I would say most people never get to see that side of life or society. You were an acting director for New Jersey's largest residential program for male juvenile offenders. Like, what a job.
Yes. It was a very challenging job, very, very challenging. I would say that was my first official leadership position as an adult. I had several leadership positions during summer programs, but as an adult, that was my very first leadership job, which I think was the foundation to me growing and becoming a better leader. I had 50 clients. We had 50 juvenile offenders, and I had 27 staff. And at the time of me assuming that position, I did not have an assistant director. So it was my secretary, the staff, and myself to lead this organization and get these kids out of the system and leading a very productive life to make positive contributions to society,
wow.
which was a challenge. Mm-hmm. So I believe in continuing to learn and grow in my leadership. And in the beginning, I must admit, I was not a great leader. I kind of took on the role of a czar, and it wasn't until one of my my staff members, he was just very raw with it. He said, I need to step with you and really talk to me about my leadership style and how ineffective it was. And I think those the words that he shared with me resonates, and that's been, almost 30 years. And I can still clearly see and hear that conversation that we had. And I think that changed the trajectory of how I started developing relationships with others, as well as really finding my niche on how to become a successful leader.
Interesting. And I know you talk a lot about developing relationships. Before we get to that, so did you go to the military and then run the juvenile center, or what? What was that sequence of events for you?
I actually was in the reserves first. So I joined the reserves as an X-ray tech. And once I was released from active duty from training, there was this position. It was an assistant director's position at the time. I applied, and the director at the time thought that I had the skills and the knowledge to be his right-hand person. And then it went forward from there. And I still had a yearning, burning desire, I should say, to really serve active duty, because, in my opinion, reserved and active duty, they're different. That I'm not in it every day. So I really wanted to experience a full-time soldier experience in the military. So I resigned from that position and then enlisted in the Army, and that was in 1996. And then served until 2016. Mm-hmm.
So you didn't come out of high school and go into the military. You actually started a career. You were in the reserves simultaneously, and then you sort of like jumped ship on your career and created a completely new career and went into the military. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. That is absolutely what I'm saying. I didn't join the active duty side of the military until I was 32.
Wow. Okay. Well, you must have been physically fit already, so you had to go through basic training. So I'm going to assume you performed just like any other 18 or 20-year-old.
There were some challenges, but I think it was just a desire to succeed. You know, they would actually not even call me mom. Some of them were kind of referring to me as the grandma of our platoon. But you know, I stuck it out. I hung with them, and you know, I made sure that I, you know, achieved I'm always a overachiever. So although we had minimum requirements, I wanted to make sure I exceeded them. So I started my career with always knowing what was the maximum performance required for our physical fitness, and that was my goal. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's start moving. So you're in the military, and did you take on leadership positions, and did being in the military did it transform your leadership skills and your knowledge of leadership? So two
Absolutely.
questions. Did you move into a leadership position in the military, and how did that shape or transform your ability to lead?
Well, originally I was not in a leadership position. I started out as a specialist and worked my way up. And I also have to backtrack a little bit. So when I came on active duty, my job changed. So I was a Spanish linguist in the Army. And so that was under the military intelligence branch of the Army. And it was... Right. Mm-hmm. So that was extensive training. So it was almost, I'm going to say, close to a year by the time I finished. So I felt that I had mentors in the beginning to really help me with that leadership journey. And it wasn't until 3.5 years later that I assumed my first official position as a leader, and that's when I was promoted to sergeant. So.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Ah, sí, me olvidé que tú puedes hablar español. Si yo quiero practicar contigo, ¿tú puedes entenderme, sí o no?
Yo necesito practicar mucho porque desde me retiré del ejército no practica mucho. Y tengo problemas con hablar. Sí, y también yo tengo problemas hablando en español porque cuando yo hablo en inglés, yo uso el tercera persona cuando yo estaba hablando sobre mí, sobre yo. Entonces, cuando yo estoy hablando en español, yo traducir los verbos en el tercera persona.
You have to translate in your mind, right? You have to translate it first in your mind. Right.
Yes,
yeah. No,
yes.
I understand. Okay,
no problem.
I understand. I always forget that you spoke Spanish, but anyway, so here you are. You've had this great career, and here we are in a pandemic. So let's talk, and I'll get back to some of that other stuff. But what's unique about your leadership style? Like, what's your focus? What is it? What are the things that you think entrepreneurs, whether small or medium-sized companies, what are the things that you can share, like your let's say, 3 principles? Do you have 3 main principles that you think people can benefit? And I just want to spend like just kind of bullet point it because I want to take some calls and let people engage you.
Okay. I think the very first principle is that you have to learn to grow yourself or be committed to growing yourself as a leader. That's very important. And understanding that leadership journey is a continuous journey. It's not something that you attain a position and then you stop. So you're not really the be-all, know-all. you're continuing to be all and to know all. So I think that's very, very important in becoming a successful leader, is knowing how to lead yourself. And then the second principle is to make sure that you really focus on developing those people around you. So you want to create an environment or a workplace that allows you to maximize the strength of those team members. So learning how to develop those individuals are very important. And then I think combined with growing yourself and growing those around you, developing those around you, will help you actually grow the organization exponentially.
Great. All right. Perfect. Before we take a call, Lori, did you? Because we've been having a conversation, Tanya and I. So, how about yourself? Did you want to ask Tanya anything before we take callers? Did we lose you, Lori?
I hear a tapping sound.
Yep, I hear it also.
Okay.
Hey, Lori? Did Lori put herself on mute?
I did, actually. I'm really having technical difficulties tonight. Yeah,
okay.
205. You on the line? 205-846.
Say again.
Hello?
Yes, it sounds like I have...
Sorry, Tanya, was that you or is that caller area code 205?
Say again.
So we're going to take a call from area code 205. 205. You're live and on the air with the Creative Alchemist. What's your name and where you're calling from?
Or not?
And maybe they want to just listen.
Leave them. Listening, and 516 is listening also, which is fine. Okay, so back to my question. Tanya, you've made some pretty great strides, and we all know the military is traditionally mostly male-dominated. So, which also, being in business is also, traditionally male-dominated. And I'm wondering how being a female plays into, your drive, your success, if you use it to your advantage, if it's ever been a challenge.
That's a very, very great question. If I can refer back to my initial leadership job, or the first leadership position I held, it was actually a male-dominated staff, and of course the clients were all males. So understanding how to interact with them so we can really stay focused on the mission was a learning process for me. And, of course, as I transitioned into the military, I realized that I was still going to face those same types of challenges, but they were on a different level for me. I feel that I had very few male mentors, and that I remember the very first interaction I had when I finished training and arrived at my duty station. I get to my platoon, and my supervisor says to me, without even knowing me, he just saw my name tag, my name tape, and he says, "You know what your problem is, Specialist Smith? You're intimidating." Those were the very first words. Not welcome, not where you from, nothing. And I thought that was rather odd to identify me, one, or categorize me or stereotype me as someone who would intimidate. And it was also confusing because at that time I'm still 5'1", but I was 127 pounds, and he stood probably 6 feet and maybe a good 170. So in my head, I could not understand how was I able to intimidate him. And what I actually came back with was, well, Sergeant, I don't think I intimidate you. You allow yourself to be intimidated. And, of course, that didn't go well. But I couldn't think of anything else to come to come back with because it left me speechless. But I think a lot of the males that I encountered during my leadership journey through the military found me to be a threat, and that I wasn't able to really develop relationships with them where we can grow and learn from each other, and that I can receive the proper mentorship. So overall, I did have a few males. I don't want to count all the males out, but I also had challenges when I was at the table to even be heard. So quite often I would be at the table and I would give input. I would share an observance or, observation, and it was completely ignored. And then what would happen is there would be another person at the table, a male, who would say the same, not even change up the words, the syntax. He would say exactly what I said, and I'm like, so I had a female commander at one time, and she started noticing this. So she started calling me at the meeting. She referred to me as Sam, who was the character in the movie Ghost. And remember, Sam, after he died, no one saw him, but he was able to be heard. So that's what I was known for after a while. And I find even after I've retired, I sit on a few boards, and most of them are male-dominated. And just today, I was at a meeting. We did a teleconference, and I gave input, and it wasn't heard. So it's quite a challenge to be in a business where it is male-dominated and that you're not treated equally or seen as equal or even seen as being significant or able to contribute something that will help grow the organization.
Interesting. I've read about that and heard it often, and there's no way I can defend men, but I've also seen that happen with men, with all men, and sometimes what seems, and I don't know what the conditions were in your situations, but it seems sometimes if you think a little bit too far ahead of people, they don't hear it. And it's almost like the brain needs to hear it more than once before it sticks.
I would agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. And I think because I think I have a gift of being a forward thinker, it's very difficult for people to, I don't want to say keep up with me, but to process my thoughts because my vision is bigger and greater than what's placed before them often. So when I get an idea or when someone presents an idea and I can see a lot further than they see, I think it's also scary because what I have to recognize as I do my reflections is that maybe I need to learn to meet people where they are, and if they're not ready to, see an entire world, we just may be only in the community. I have to, realize I need to reel back a little bit and use a methodical, strategic plan to help get them to the bigger picture.
Well, I want you to definitely talk about your methodology and how you train people. But if we were to sort of take the ground floor of leadership, one of the major roles for leadership is to get people to a place they have never been before. And that's whether it's scary or it's just difficult to comprehend. If you look at Tom Watson Jr. in the 1960s when he was talking about building this mainframe computer, it didn't make sense, and so asking people to build something they don't know how to do, and there's no blueprint. Steve Jobs, I've seen interviews of him when he asked the guy to make the first computer mouse for Apple, but Steve Jobs had seen it in Xerox PARC, so he just gave a context. I want you to create something that looks like this, has this functionality, this size. And so often leaders are walking off the edge. Like a leader walks off the edge, and his top people will be on the edge. And now the top people have to get the rest of the company to get out there where the leader is. So I think that may be a frustration that many leaders experience, is that they've walked off the edge and they've got like nothing under them except their thoughts, their vision. Mm-hmm. And getting people to come out there is often a challenge. So it sounds like that's really like you truly have that kind of leadership mindset to pull people out there. And then getting everyone else to join you becomes a challenge. And I don't know if that's limited to a gender. I think that's just for people who have big ideas. They experience that. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that it's not gender specific. But I found later on during my leadership journey in the military, is that in order for me to be successful in the missions that I was assigned, is that I had to get to know the people that worked with me. And notice I always say with me. I will always say with me. No one really worked for me. We worked together. Right. And there were challenges with that in the beginning, because I really believe that people do not care about what you know until you really show that you care about them. So understanding their needs, where they're coming from, what their desires are, and finding ways to incorporate that into the business model, I believe gives them a sense of ownership within the organization and the willingness to want it to grow. So identifying your team members, your direct reports, whatever title you want to give them, identifying their strengths and their interests, I think is very important in knowing how to place them and help them understand how their role is important in the overall mission. Something that I think this crisis, and I don't want to get into this yet, but I wanted to address that we really didn't understand the importance or really appreciate the importance of these people that we have now put in the front line, when they have been the core, the foundation of actually what was helping organizations operate. So now we're thinking about the correction officers and the nurses and all of these people. But if
right.
we worked with them in the beginning and understood that their role, their contribution was part of the big picture, we probably wouldn't be focusing so much on identifying or showing a level of appreciation and gratitude that we have. Even teachers, it's not until we're at this crisis and we're reaching almost back to say
right.
who is helping us. So building them, and I say that because at this crisis point, we didn't realize how much teachers really contributed to parents' work days until they had to step back and they had to take on that responsibility. So understanding what...
I want to take it right there, perfect right there. So I know we have a number of callers, and I think, I don't know how much those lines are lighting up. I know Lori can see that. But there may be some people who have some needs and have questions for you, and I want to give them an opportunity to contribute to this show right now. So, Lori, you want to take a couple of callers before we move into the pandemic?
Yeah, I know 443 has been on hold for a while. I'm not sure if they're listening or want to participate. So 443.
No.
Just
Yep, 443. You're live and on the air with the Creative Alchemist. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Nope. Okay. Well,
443.
Just listen.
Okay. Do we have another one?
So, no, we're good. We have a few listeners, but nobody wants, nobody has questions. We're just listening, so that's good.
Okay. All right. before I ask a question, Lori, did you have already asked some good questions? Do you want to ask some more before we dive into the pandemic? And
not yet. So far, we're good.
So before we get into the pandemic, I mean, you were talking about developing your people, and the wrong way to look at your people is as inventory. But in some ways, you have people who are almost like an inventory, and you have to do an inventory of like who they are, their ambitions, their skills and competencies, and even their mindset, like, you know, what their mindset is for. And I know you talk a lot about building relationships. So is that, when you talk about knowing your people, is that really a big deal for you to be able to make sure you understand what your people need? Is that, do you go out of your way to build relationships? And just for other leaders out there, is that like you become their best buddy and friend? I mean, or is there some delicate balancing that act for you?
I think that's an excellent question. One is definitely a delicate balance. Having that communication, that open line of communication, is definitely key to an organization's success. Understanding the purpose of, and I like what you used, or how you referred to employees as inventory, in the sense that when you are looking at your inventory, you're assessing what you have, what's working, what's not working, what's coming off the shelf quickly. It's the same as almost looking at employees. So I really like that. I'm going to do a deep dive into that later after this show. But I find that when you spend some time really getting to know them, I want to just touch on two experiences that I had when I had to lead individuals, and they were with a failing mission. So one was when I was in recruiting, and I had a foreign language mission, and I was in charge of it, and the area of coverage was all the way from Maine to Virginia. And the Army had this mission for 9 years and had never achieved it. So when I got into this position, I kind of followed what everyone else was doing, and hence I think that was part of why the mission was not successful. And I would just talk to the recruiters, and they weren't responsive. And I just decided that I needed to change my approach. And I started really asking them about themselves, what they liked about recruiting, if they had foreign language skills, what could I do to help develop them? And they actually took a genuine interest in me as well as in the mission. And in the 9-year history of that mission that we have for foreign languages, we were the only brigade in the entire USAREC to have ever achieved the mission, and we also exceeded it. What I found interesting about that was once I left and deployed to Iraq, they were still calling to reach out to me. So I found that to be very impactful, and it was profound that my presence was valued and how I treated them was valued because, you know, normally when you leave an organization, that's usually it. They don't really reach forward to continue to ask assistance. They work with the new person. In this case, it wasn't a replacement, but the relationship that I built, I mean, to have people trying to reach me while I was in Iraq was phenomenal. And even when I returned, I still had people reaching out and asking me, hey, is this mission still on? They just grew and they blossomed. Another pivotal point for me in my success in getting to know the people I led was when I was back in California for a language, and I was a AIT instructor, or an AIT platoon sergeant, which meant I was responsible for the training and the development of soldiers while they were learning Chinese. I was assigned to a Chinese platoon. And
do you speak Mandarin at all?
No. So this is exactly what I mean about
Spanish.
Just Spanish.
Spanish is good. Any
yes.
other aside from English and Spanish? Do you
nope,
speak
just
any other?
English and Spanish. Just English and Spanish. Yes.
Okay.
So I'm assigned to a team who is learning Chinese, and I have no idea what they're saying. And we had never had a record of having a 100% graduation rate. So I actually told them, I said, we are going to be the first ones to do this. We're going to have a 100% graduation rate. Everybody is going to pass. And I found that I also had to help them understand the mission and the goal. And the goal was to have all graduates achieve at least a 2.2, which is a score that we need for assessing their language capabilities. But in addition to that, they also needed to learn to be soldiers because they were still in a training phase.
Right.
So I really focused on the Army values, and I ingrained in them on a daily basis what those Army values were and actually had them look into themselves to see if they were living up to those Army values. So between having the Army values instilled in them and being creative with helping them succeed, and they knew that I was very interested in their learning success. So I just found different ways to identify the strengths within the team, who read well, who was a good speaker, who was a good listener, and I actually positioned them within the team to help others succeed. So, for example, we would stand in formation, and I would pull off a Chinese article, an article that was written in Chinese, and I would have someone come up and read it. So that person was working on their reading skills as well as their speaking skills. And then right. I asked the other members, what did they say? And I would have them translate. Long story short of that, we had a 100% graduation rate. We also exceeded the minimum requirements. I think we had like a 98% rate of individuals who exceeded the minimum standards, the required standards.
Wow, really good.
And I believe it all had to do with me investing in them, investing in their leadership, investing in their leadership skills, because I was at that time almost 50, and I didn't understand why the Army would assign me to lead soldiers who were more than half my age, because I had to physically lead them, and I knew I had limitations. I'm almost 50, and you want me to run as fast as a 17-year-old. So I knew that in order to make that team successful, you also, as a leader, need to know your strengths and your weaknesses. So a 12 or 15-minute mile was not in me anymore. So I would identify my fast runners and put them in charge of running PT. I think one of the things that's important is understanding your future leader's strengths so you can help them learn how to lead others.
So I hear a couple of things in what you're saying, and one thing I kind of want to connect your first leadership position with the juvenile detention center.
Mm-hmm.
And you said one of the men approached you and said he needed to talk to you about the way you lead people, the way you, I guess, talk, manage, handle people.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you went from, and I'm going to use the wrong word, but I'm kind of saying it in fun, but you went from a tyrant to being someone who is very skilled in emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
That's what I hear, right? And I know we're going to run out of time. The second thing I hear is delegation. And like you strategically use delegation as a way to develop and coach people up to be more effective leaders. So can you talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, because, and I know I'm talking a lot, but a lot of people have the wrong idea about leadership. They think leadership is telling people what to do. I had a client who was the CEO of a $900 million company, and his daughter said, "Daddy, you're so lucky. You're the CEO. You can fire anyone." And people just have this image, whether they, obtain that image from the media or books, that leaders are supposed to be these, controlling, in charge, dictator kind of people, and and you may have been that at one time, and people didn't have much appreciation for it, right? You might be harder to get people to exceed expectations. So you took a journey, it sounds like, to develop emotional and your EQ or emotional intelligence, and you have this great approach of delegating in a way that it empowers people. So can you touch on those two things?
Absolutely. Emotional intelligence is something that I have definitely embraced. I'm a big follower of Daniel Goleman, who is an American psychologist, and he actually was the one who helped popularize emotional intelligence. And for those who don't know, or just to refresh your memory on emotional intelligence, it actually is 5 key elements, and it's self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And I believe having self-awareness is first is definitely important, because when you know how you feel and you know how your emotions and actions can affect the people around you, when you're in a leadership position, it means that you're actually having a clearer picture of your strengths and weaknesses. So you're able to kind of act on a level of certain humility. Now, when you want to move into self-regulation, I think those leaders who can regulate themselves effectively, those are the ones who rarely you see verbally attacking others, and they also don't make they're not rushed in making their decisions. And so knowing your value, holding yourself accountable, and actually practicing being calm are key factors in helping you with your self-regulation. And I don't want to do this as a teaching tool, but also having motivation. But I want to go into the empathy, because for leaders, having that empathy, I honestly believe, is critical in managing a successful team or an organization. Because when you have empathy, you have the ability to put yourself in other people's situations. So you're able to develop your team and challenge others. I want to say who are even acting unfairly, you give them consistent feedback. And I think that's truly important, to learn how to be fair and impartial. That's actually part of our creed as non-commissioned officers. That's a portion of it, is to know how to act or how to be fair and impartial. And if we had more time, I would definitely have loved to talk about that. I had an instance where I did not like one of my soldiers, but when I had to make a decision for him to have an opportunity, I had to move away from how I felt about him and actually analyze or assess his contribution or his performance, and really strongly step in and defend him. So
I just want to say that it takes a really big person to do that. So kudos to you for that.
Yes, if I could just spend 30 seconds talking about that. He was a soldier. He was a junior leader, and he was very self-absorbed, but he did well in the class, and
right.
He also did well with physical fitness. He was not selected to do an immersion course, which was going to China, but there was a female who was selected who was on the verge of being withdrawn from the class because she had excessive absences. She did not excel. Her grade point average wasn't as high as his, and she didn't perform physically, but she was selected. So I actually went to advocate for him, and I had to put my feelings aside and say, you really don't like him as a person, but he is deserving. He earned the right to get this, to take advantage of that opportunity. So they reversed the decision. Unfortunately, the female was not happy, but I believe that for me to stand in my values and to really uphold the creed of the non-commissioned officer, and that is to be fair and impartial with offering rewards and punishment.
And you have to know your people to do that, right? To be fair,
absolutely.
you really have to know who they are and what they actually bring to the table, and what's in the best interest of the whole. So that, and that's, I think, a major trait of a leader is being able to kind of take themselves out and look at what's the best interest of the whole, not their own selfish reasons and who they like and don't like. So that's great. Can you talk about the delegation part and how you strategically employ that tactic or strategy?
Again, that came with getting to know my soldiers and having just more than I would say one-way conversation with them when we were doing our monthly counseling and quarterly for the leaders. Really getting to know what their interests were, what their strengths were. I did not want to set them up for failure. I believe failure is a good thing, but to be set up for failure causes you to, I think, sit too long to make a comeback. So I would understand exactly where their level of uncomfortability rested and would try to take it to the next level. So having that conversation with them on what their fears were, what are some things that they were most proud of, what do they think they can bring to the table, having that conversation with them is crucial, I think, in developing individuals, so being able to delegate. I remember I had a soldier who was going to be separated. This is when I was in California. They were going to be separated from the military. I didn't agree with why, but that's not important. But what I did to him to help build his self-confidence was we had a cleanup detail, and I put him in charge. And I said, PFC so-and-so, I need you to go out there with these people, and you need to do area cleanup. And I said, I'm holding you accountable, so you don't bring them back to me to say you're ready for me to check until you say it's good. And I think just the look that he gave me, one, that I had the confidence in him that he was able to handle that task. And he actually, when I went out to inspect, he identified areas that I didn't even think about that needed to be addressed. So putting that confidence in them that you trust them to handle the task, I think is crucial to developing someone and helping them on their success journey as well.
Now that's important. That's very interesting to bring that up, because I think that's the unintended cultural development that happens when you delegate. You actually are telling someone, I trust you. And and what I also want to address in that you use the word failure. So when you delegate, you often may be delegating something where the person doesn't have the same level of expertise as you do or the leader does. And they may fail. So is that embraced, or do you immediately dismiss them if they fail at it, the first one or a couple of times? I mean, how do you deal with delegation and failure? Is it acceptable, or and are you worried about trust? Does trust fit into that? So,
yes, I think it's very important to encourage failure. I don't think anything really develops successfully without it failing first, and that's something that I share with anyone that I'm coaching, mentoring, even during training sessions, because people in the Army, we have this concept that failure is not an option. But we should in my opinion, we should actually incorporate failure. Now, of course, for some missions, failure is not an option. But I don't think it should be applied to everything that we address, because that's where your lessons are learned. I have John Maxwell, who is one of my mentors, and I think one of the key quotes that he always says, that we talk about failure, and we say sometimes that experience is our best teacher. But what John actually emphasizes is that it's the evaluated experience is our best teacher. That's the best lesson. So being able to really go back and assess what went right, what went wrong, how can we improve, is is a need, is necessary in order for you to be able to move forward. I always share with people everything that we have had accessible to us had some failures at first. You think about the Wright brothers. Their first flight was not successful.
Right.
You think about the athletes, how many failures they had before, and they probably had more failures than they had successes. So I think to really hone in that failure is an absolute requirement in order to be successful will help people get into the mindset that, okay, I need to learn from this failure and to add value to my experience so it can push me further. I think to really focus on being successful in everything is really setting you up for failure. You need to understand that there are some risks that's involved.
Now,
if that was the case, we wouldn't have
delegating,
recalls. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask, if you're delegating and the person doesn't, they don't complete it, up to expectations, right? So whether you call it failure or it's incomplete, and if you continue to allow them to work on it, like you still delegate, do you think that has a bigger impact on the trust relationship?
I think it does to some extent, but I also believe, and I'll make some references to John because I think he's an absolute expert on leadership, a great expert on leadership. He says that everything rises and falls on leadership. So for me, if a soldier fails or if anyone that I'm working with fails, I take that failure personally because I don't feel as though I poured into them what they did. So I didn't equip them to be successful. So their failure is my failure, and we'll talk about that because there's something that I did not recognize in that. So that's, again, why the failure is acceptable, why it's okay, because we're both learning from it.
So you're taking full accountability, and that's when they talk about leadership by example. I mean, that's a perfect illustration of leadership by example. So what are you doing these days? So are you still in the military? I heard you talk about teaching. So are you still leading others? Like, what are you doing with all these skills you've developed?
Well, since I retired, it's been 3.5 years. I started my own company. It's a leadership development company, and I also offer pre-retirement coaching for military service members who have had at least 15 years of service to help prepare them for a successful transition. So I have a company called Life in Quarters, and I named it Life in Quarters because I'm a big proponent of professional and personal development. And I used that, I gave my company that name because I looked at how everything external to us is evaluated for success. So, for example, in the business market, which we've been talking about today, they measure their goals in quarters, or they measure their success in quarters. Academia is in quarters, so on and so forth. So in order for us to really grow ourselves, both personally and professionally, I think we should look at the phase we are in life and figure out what we need to do to continue to develop ourselves. So that's the methodology that I use when I'm helping individuals become their future desired self, as well as working with individuals to make that smooth transition. So I've also co-wrote a book called Camouflage Sisters, Leadership Through the Eyes of Senior Military Leaders. I co-authored that with other female leaders, and we talked about, in each of our chapters, we share our leadership journeys, our challenges and our successes during our career.
Very good, and congratulations. So how can people contact you? How can they get a hold of you if they want to discuss what you do? Great.
Well, I have a website, and the website is, of course, Life in Quarters, and it's spelled out, so it's LIFEINQUARTERS.com. And I'm also on social media, so I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and and not Instagram. Yes, Instagram. I'm working on a Twitter account. I'm still technologically challenged. But you can reach me through my website. All of my email information, telephone number, and everything is accessible through my website. So thank you for affording me that opportunity.
No, it's our pleasure. So can you kind of sum up this whole conversation? I'm putting you on the spot now. I know that. In about 60 seconds, can you tell us, in this pandemic, from the things you've just talked about and learned, what advice would you give someone leading in this pandemic?
I feel that communication is an absolute necessity in dealing with this pandemic. It's an opportunity, I believe, for leaders to assess their organization. You also have an opportunity to really find out where you are in your leadership journey, because there's a lot of leaders, I think, where we're seeing their ability or inability to actually lead. And your effectiveness, I believe, has been highlighted through this pandemic. So, one, having that honest conversation with your team, and really using this time to identify the strengths of your team, so you can help, so everyone can contribute to helping it grow. I don't think that it should just lie specifically on the leadership. You need that team to help you through this journey. There's a loud tapping.
Just stop. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So perfect. So I think we're just about out of time. So I have to say a huge thank you. You've been an excellent guest. You shared a lot of wisdom. I want to thank all the callers and listeners for tuning in, and thank you for listening to The Creative Alchemist, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks again for having me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, everyone.